All right. Ready to dive into something that's kind of familiar but also kind of creepy?
Oh, do tell.
We're talking online privacy policies
Okay.
and those little things
Yeah.
called cookies.
Uh-huh.
Specifically, we're going to be peeking behind the velvet rope at Soho House.
Oh, fancy.
You know, those exclusive members-only clubs?
Yeah, I've heard of those.
Got their cookie policy and privacy notice right here in front of us.
Sounds exciting.
And we're going to see what happens to your data
All right.
when you step into their digital domain.
Interesting.
Let's just say, they know a lot more about you
Oh,
than just your drink order.
I bet. I'm always fascinated to see just how much information is actually gathered
Right.
and for what purposes.
It's crazy, right?
Like, did you know they even collect CCTV footage?
no way.
Yeah, and dietary preferences.
Wow.
It really highlights how important it is to actually understand these policies.
Totally.
Even though, they can be a little bit of a snooze fest at times.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's start with something that's probably familiar to most people listening.
Right.
Cookies.
Cookies, yes.
Now, I know most of you are probably familiar with cookies,
Right.
but hang on,
Okay.
because Soho House's use of third-party cookies
Oh, yeah.
is where things get really interesting in terms of privacy.
Exactly.
Like, really interesting.
These third-party cookies, they're like little spies.
What?
Yeah. They can track you across different websites.
So it's not just what I'm doing on the Soho House website. It's, connected
It's all
to
connected.
everything else I do online.
Exactly.
Oh, that is kind of creepy.
Yeah, so let's say you visit the Soho House website,
Okay.
then you browse to travel blog, and then you check out a furniture store, right?
I do love furniture.
If all those sites use cookies from the same third-party provider,
Uh-huh.
that provider can start piecing together
Oh, no.
a pretty detailed profile of your online behavior.
So they know I like mid-century modern furniture. And that I'm looking at flights too, like Italy.
Maybe it really shows how much data can be collected
And connected.
and connected, yes.
A bit unsettling.
It can be.
So Soho House breaks down the types of cookies they use into 4 categories.
Okay.
Strictly necessary,
Uh-huh.
analytics performance,
Got it.
functionality, and advertising.
Makes sense.
Let's break down what each one actually means for you.
Yeah, let's do that.
Starting with strictly necessary cookies.
The essentials.
Right. These are, strictly necessary for the site to function.
Like what?
Think about, logging in, making payments, that sort of thing.
The basics.
Exactly. And here's the interesting thing.
Okay.
You can't refuse these cookies.
Really?
The policy states that outright.
Wow.
It kind of shows how,
Yeah.
even with cookies,
Mm-hmm.
there are limits to user control.
It's interesting how those limitations are set.
So even if you're super privacy conscious,
Right.
you're kind of stuck with those.
Up with the essentials.
All right, moving on to analytics performance cookies.
The data collectors.
Yeah, these are like the data collectors of the cookie world.
They're keeping tabs on everything.
And Soho House uses a whole bunch of services for this.
Like what?
We're talking Google Analytics, PostHog, Hotjar, Intercom, even Bing.
So it's not just one company collecting data.
Nope, it's a whole party.
It's a data party.
Mm.
And this is where things get a little global,
Oh.
Did you know that Google actually stores the data collected through Google Analytics on servers in the U.S.?
Seriously?
Yeah.
My data is going on a trip without me.
Basically.
But why does that matter?
Well, different countries have different data protection laws, right?
Sure.
So your data might be subject to different rules and regulations depending on where it's stored.
That's a good point.
Hmm.
Okay, then we've got functionality cookies.
These are the ones that, remember your preferences.
Right, they personalize your experience.
Exactly, so you don't have to start from scratch every time.
Soho House uses cookies from Empathy Broker for search functionality,
Okay.
Spotify and YouTube for embedded content,
Interesting.
and even Agora for their House Connect video calls.
Wow, that's a lot of different providers.
It's a lot of third-party involvement for sure.
And each of those providers has their own data practices,
Oh, right.
which, can be hard to keep track of.
Yeah, that's a lot to keep track of.
It highlights just how interconnected the online world is
Yeah,
and how your data can be flowing through all these different channels.
it is kind of mind-boggling when you think about it.
It really is.
And then finally, we have the advertising cookies.
Ah, yes, the ones designed to target you with ads.
Based on
Well, guessed it.
your online activity.
It's all about personalization.
Soho House uses cookies from Facebook, DoubleClick, which, by the way, is owned by Google,
Right.
and Twitter for this.
So they're covering all the major players?
This is the heart of personalized advertising, right?
Exactly.
The idea is that by tracking your browsing habits, companies can show you ads that are more likely to be relevant to your interests.
More relevant, more effective.
But it does make you wonder how much we're willing to sacrifice privacy for a more personalized online experience.
It's a good question, isn't it? Like, what's the trade-off?
Right. Some people might love seeing ads tailored to their interests.
Absolutely, it can be convenient.
But others might find it creepy and intrusive.
For sure. It can feel like an invasion of privacy.
It's all about finding what you're comfortable with, right?
A personal choice.
But before we spiral down that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
the cookie policy does give you some options.
That's good to hear.
It's not all doom and gloom.
There's hope.
So you do have some control over cookies.
Tell me more.
You can manage or delete cookies through your browser settings.
Okay, so it's not completely out of our hand.
Nope. And the policy even provides links for popular browsers like Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, so you can find the specific instructions for your browser.
That's helpful.
They also list some specific opt-out tools.
Like what?
For example, if you're concerned about Google Analytics tracking, you can download the Google Analytics opt-out browser add-on.
So you can specifically target Google Analytics.
Exactly. And there are direct opt-out links for Facebook and DoubleClick as well.
Okay, so you can pick and choose which companies you want to opt out of.
And if you want to take a more broad brush approach,
Okay.
there are general opt-out resources mentioned, like aboutachids.info choices
I've heard of that one.
and your onlinechoices.com.
These are good resources for managing your privacy.
These sites let you manage your advertising preferences across a whole range of participating companies.
So you don't have to go to each company individually.
It's a good option if you want to limit tracking across the board.
It's like a one-stop shop for privacy management.
But, and this is a big but,
Uh-oh, there's a but.
opting out of cookies can impact how well websites function.
Right, the trade-offs.
It's a trade-off for sure.
You gain some privacy, but you might lose some convenience or personalization.
Like what?
For example, you might have to log in every time you visit a site.
Oh, that's annoying.
Or you might see fewer relevant ads.
That's a tough one.
It's about finding what works best for you.
Finding that balance.
Exactly.
All right, now let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and dive into the privacy notice.
Deeper into the rabbit hole.
This document gives us a much broader look at how Soho House handles your data.
Beyond just cookies.
Going beyond just cookies, exactly.
And trust me, it gets even more interesting.
Oh, I bet it does. The privacy notice starts by listing the categories of data they collect.
Like what?
We've got the usual suspects:
Okay.
identity, contact, employment, preferences, nationality, financial, technical.
The standard stuff, but then...
We get to the stuff that really made my eyebrows raise.
What is it?
They collect CCTV footage,
Wow.
driving license or passport information,
For age verification, I assume.
dietary preferences. It's like they're building a detailed portrait of your life,
Both online and offline.
both online and offline.
It's a lot of information.
And here's something else that stood out to me.
Got
They store your payment information for future purchases.
convenient. But,
Unless you specifically opt out,
oh, so it's not automatic.
nope, you have to tell them not to store it.
That's interesting.
I mean, it's convenient,
Definitely.
but it also raises questions about how much control we're giving up in the name of convenience.
That's a great point.
It's like that classic tension between convenience and privacy.
Right. Like, how much are we willing to sacrifice for a smoother experience?
Exactly. And the privacy notice at least gives you the information to make an informed choice.
Transparency is key.
So, why are they collecting all this data?
The million-dollar question.
Well, the privacy notice lists a number of reasons.
Lay it on me.
Obviously, they need your information to evaluate your membership application
Makes sense.
and to fulfill reservations, whether it's for rooms, restaurants, or other services.
So the basic operational stuff.
Right. But it goes beyond just the purely functional aspects.
Oh.
They also use it for marketing and promotions.
To tailor those messages to your interests, I bet.
Exactly. And they want to understand your preferences and habits.
To personalize your experience as a member.
To make you feel special.
Exactly. It's all about creating that exclusive feel.
They even use your data to enable social interactions on their platform.
Like what?
Connecting with other members who share your interests.
So you can network with like-minded individuals.
It all makes sense in a way, but it's still a lot of data.
Yeah, the sheer volume of it is pretty mind-blowing.
Being collected and processed for a variety of purposes.
And this is where we get into the legal gray areas.
Oh.
A lot of this data processing is justified under what they call legitimate interests.
Okay, break it down for me.
What does legitimate interest even mean?
I was just about to ask that.
Essentially, legitimate interests means that Soho House believes they have a valid reason for processing your data, even without your explicit consent.
So they don't necessarily need my permission.
Not in every case.
It's a little unsettling.
It can be, but there are some safeguards.
Like what?
It can't override your fundamental rights and freedoms.
So there are limits to what they can do.
Exactly.
But it still feels a little unbalanced, doesn't it?
It definitely raises questions about power dynamics and transparency.
Like, who gets to decide what constitutes a legitimate interest?
Right. It's up to them to determine that, and it's up to us to decide whether we're comfortable with it.
It's one of those things we need to be aware of as users.
Awareness is key.
Now, let's talk about data sharing.
Who are they sharing it with?
Well, the privacy notice is pretty upfront about sharing your data within their group.
Which makes sense, since it's a global organization.
Right, they've got locations all over the world.
So your data might be traveling.
My data's going on another trip.
It's a possibility. They also share data with external service providers.
Like who?
Payment processors, IT companies, analytics providers, that sort of thing.
So it's not just Soho House that has access to my data.
Nope, it's a whole network of companies.
It's like a chain of data sharing.
Exactly. And who knows how securely it's all being handled at each link in the chain.
That's a good point.
It's not just about Soho House's practices.
It's about the practices of all those other companies involved.
It's a complex web of data relationships.
And here's another layer of complexity.
Hit me with it.
They mention cross-border data transfers.
Ah, yes, the global data dance.
They claim to comply with relevant laws.
But it's a reminder that your data might be traveling to countries with different data protection standards.
So my data could be subject to weaker privacy protections in some cases.
It's possible, depending on the country.
That's definitely something to think about.
It highlights the complexity of the global data landscape.
Data privacy is a global issue, but the laws and regulations can vary widely from one place to another.
It's a patchwork of different rules and standards.
They do highlight their security measures.
Which is good.
But they also acknowledge that online transmission is never 100% secure.
That's the reality of the digital world, unfortunately.
It's like saying, we're doing our best, but no guarantees.
It's a reminder that there's always some level of risk involved.
Doesn't exactly inspire confidence, does it?
It's definitely something to be aware of.
But hey, it's not all doom and gloom.
There's a silver lining.
Let's talk about your rights.
Finally, some empowerment.
This is where things start to feel a bit more hopeful.
Tell me more.
The privacy notice outlines the rights you have under data protection laws in the UK and EEA.
Okay, so these are specific to those regions.
And these include some pretty important ones.
Like what?
The right to access your data.
So you can see what they have on you.
Correct. Inaccurate data.
Fix any mistakes.
Request deletion.
Get rid of it altogether.
Okay. Restrict processing.
Limit how they use it.
And data portability.
Take your data with you.
You also have the right to object to processing, especially for direct marketing.
So you can say no to those targeted ads.
And to withdraw consent.
Take back your permission.
Wow, that's a lot of rights. It's almost like a menu of options for controlling your data.
It's like a privacy toolkit.
It's not just about taking what they give you, you actually have some say in the matter.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your online privacy.
And making sure your data is being handled in a way you're comfortable with.
It's about setting boundaries and asserting your rights.
Okay, so we've covered cookies, the general scope of the privacy notice, and even user rights.
A lot of ground covered.
But hold on, because there's a twist.
A twist.
The privacy notice includes separate appendices for specific regions.
Oh, really?
Israel, Brazil, Hong Kong, the US, California, India, Mexico, and Turkey.
Wow, they're really covering their bases.
Why all the separate appendices?
The question.
What's going on there?
These appendices are where things get really nuanced.
Nuance. I love nuance.
They highlight key differences in data protection laws and user rights in each of those regions.
So depending on where I live,
Exactly.
I might have different rights and protections when it comes to my data.
Different rules for different places.
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure for data privacy.
It certainly adds another layer of complexity.
But it also shows that Soho House is at least attempting to comply with the various data protection laws around the world.
They're trying to navigate a complex global landscape.
Well, we've given you the overview.
The lay of the land.
But now it's time to dive into those region-specific appendices and see how they apply to you.
Get ready for a deep dive into the nuances of data privacy across the globe.
Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive.
where we'll unpack those appendices and explore the fascinating complexities of data protection in different parts of the world.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into Soho House's data practices.
Back for more.
Last time,
Yeah.
we left off with a bit of a cliffhanger.
Oh, right.
Those region-specific appendices in the privacy notice.
So many appendices.
So buckle up,
Okay.
because we're about to take a whirlwind tour
It's fun.
of data privacy around the world.
I'm ready.
It's amazing how data protection laws can vary so much from one country to the next.
Right. It's like a whole different world.
It really highlights the challenges
Yeah.
of operating in a globalized digital landscape.
For sure.
All right, first up,
Where are we going?
Israel.
Okay.
Appendix 1 jumps right into a difference
Ooh, a difference already.
in terminology.
What is it?
They use the term database owner
Interesting.
instead of,
Data controller.
so same concept, different name.
Exactly. It's the same concept.
Gotcha.
The entity responsible for making decisions
Right.
about how your data is processed.
But the wording is different.
But the different wording
Yeah.
reflects the specific legal framework.
In Israel.
Okay, next up.
Next up is Brazil.
All right. Where's that one?
Appendix 2 has something that's becoming
What is it?
increasingly important:
Oh.
specific provisions
Awesome.
for children's data.
Ah, yes. That's very important these days.
It emphasizes that processing the data of children under 12
Mm-hmm.
requires explicit consent
Okay.
from at least one parent or legal guardian.
Makes sense.
Soho House even reserves the right
To what?
to request proof of age
To make sure they're following the rules.
to ensure compliance. Exactly.
Smart.
That's a good example of how companies are having to adapt
Adept to what?
to growing concerns
Tabé.
about protecting children's privacy online.
Yeah, children are especially vulnerable when it comes to data collection.
Absolutely.
It's encouraging to see companies taking steps to address this.
Now let's hop over to Hong Kong.
Hong Kong. Okay.
Appendix 3 dives into the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance,
Sounds official.
which outlines the specific rights and obligations related to data protection in Hong Kong.
Lots of rules and regulations.
One thing that stood out to me
Yeah.
is the clear statement on direct marketing.
Tell me more.
Soho House states that they won't use your data for marketing purposes
Yeah.
unless
It's a
they
good
have
idea.
your consent. So I have to opt in.
Or you have an objection.
So I can opt out.
They also provide instructions
On what?
on how to opt out
Out of.
of marketing communications.
So even though they collect a lot of data, they're giving users in Hong Kong some control over how that data is used,
Exactly.
especially for marketing purposes,
It shows how regional laws can influence a company's data practices.
and give users more control over how their information is used.
From Hong Kong, we're heading across the Pacific
Across the Pacific
to the United States,
to the U.S.
where things get a little more complicated.
Oh, no, more complicated.
Appendix 4,
Yeah.
which applies to the U.S. generally.
Okay.
This talks about do not track requests.
Yeah. Ah, yes, the infamous Do Not Track button. What about it? It's a browser setting that lets you signal your preference to not be tracked online.
But does it actually work?
But as Soho House points out,
Yeah.
their sites currently don't respond to these
Oh.
requests.
So even if I have do not track enabled,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean companies will stop tracking me.
Unfortunately, Do Not Track has been largely ineffective.
Why is that?
A lot of websites simply ignore
Oh,
these requests.
that's frustrating.
It highlights the limitations
Wow.
of relying solely on browser settings
Okay.
for privacy protection.
So what can we do?
It's a reminder that we need to be proactive about managing our online privacy,
How do we do that?
using a combination of tools and strategies.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Absolutely.
We need to be aware of the different options available to us.
Yes.
And make informed choices based on our individual privacy preferences.
Appendix 4 also mentions something important:
What's that?
third-party websites
Okay.
and social media features.
Ah, yes, those are everywhere.
They emphasize that they're not responsible
For what?
for the privacy practices of other websites.
Even if those websites are linked from Soho House's own sites?
Even if they are, yes.
So just because I clicked on a link from a trusted website,
Right.
it doesn't mean I'm automatically protected on the other end.
Exactly. It's a crucial point.
We need to be careful.
We need to be aware of the privacy policies of every website we visit,
Every single one.
especially when sharing personal information.
That's when it really matters.
And speaking of social media,
Yeah.
Appendix 4 reminds us that those seemingly harmless buttons and embedded content can actually collect information about you.
Like what kind of information?
Things like your IP address and browsing activity.
I didn't realize that.
It's another example of how data collection can happen in subtle ways.
Those social media features might seem integrated into the website.
Yeah.
But they're often governed by the privacy policies of the social media platforms themselves.
So you might think you're just interacting with the Soho House website, but you're actually also interacting with Facebook or Twitter.
Or whatever platform.
Or whatever platform that social media feature is from.
That's a good point.
It's a good reminder to be aware of the different ways data can be collected online.
And to
read the privacy policies of all the websites and services you use.
All of them. Even the ones that seem harmless.
Let's zoom in on California.
California, the land of data privacy.
Which has some of the strongest data privacy laws in the U.S.
They're really leading the way.
Appendix 5 outlines how Soho House complies with the California Consumer Privacy Act.
The CCPA?
Or CCPA.
I've heard of that.
The CCPA gives California residents
What does it give them?
some powerful rights.
Like what?
Like the right to opt out of the sale of their personal information.
So they can say no to companies selling their data.
And the right to request deletion of their personal information.
So they can just wipe the slate clean.
Soho House provides clear instructions on how to exercise these rights.
That's good.
Including a dedicated link on their homepage.
Easy access.
They also provide a detailed breakdown of the categories of personal information they collect. How they use it, and whether it's sold or shared.
It's like a data transparency report.
It's a good example of how companies are becoming more transparent about their data practices.
Transparency is important.
But it's also important that users understand their rights and feel empowered to exercise them.
It's about taking control of your own data.
Next stop on our data privacy world tour.
Where to next?
India.
India, okay.
Appendix 6 delves into the specific legal landscape in India.
Another new legal landscape.
Highlighting the different legal bases for processing personal information.
So many different rules.
One interesting aspect is the emphasis on consent.
They really value consent in India.
Soho House states that they'll always request your consent. For what? For processing your data.
When they're relying on that legal basis.
When they're relying on consent.
Okay.
They also mention the option of providing this notice in English.
Okay.
Or any other Indian language.
That's inclusive.
Which is a great example of how companies can be more inclusive and accessible.
It shows a sensitivity to the linguistic diversity of India.
And a commitment to ensuring that users understand their rights and choices.
Especially regarding data privacy.
Appendix 6 also addresses cross-border data transfers.
That tricky topic again.
Which is always a sensitive topic.
Look at the different data protection laws.
Soho House assures users that they'll only share data with third parties outside India who provide the same level of data protection.
As required under Indian law.
As required under Indian law.
That's good to know.
It's an important safeguard.
Especially considering that data protection laws can vary significantly.
From country to country.
Yeah.
It's reassuring to know that they're taking steps to protect users' data.
Even when?
Even when it's being transferred across borders.
It's an example of how companies can be more responsible and accountable.
When it comes to data privacy. All right, our final destination on this data privacy world tour.
Last stop.
Mexico. Appendix 7 serves as the official privacy notice.
The official one?
Or aviso de privacidad.
That's the Spanish term, right?
For users in Mexico.
Okay.
They provide a specific address for the data controller in Mexico.
So they have a local presence.
Which demonstrates a commitment to local compliance.
It shows that they're taking the time to understand and comply with the specific data protection laws in Mexico.
They also outline the primary and secondary purposes for processing personal data.
Primary and secondary, what's the difference?
The primary purposes are those that are essential.
Essential
for the core functions of the business.
Like what?
Like processing purchases and managing memberships.
The basics.
Secondary purposes, on the other hand, are those that are not strictly necessary for the core function.
Like what?
Like marketing and analytics.
Okay.
Soho House provides instructions on how users can opt out of these secondary purposes.
If they choose.
If they choose.
It's a great example of how companies can give users more granular control over their data.
Allowing them to decide which purposes they're comfortable with.
It's all about choice.
Appendix 7 also emphasizes the right to limit the use and disclosure of personal data.
Which is a key right under Mexican law.
It's a reminder that data privacy isn't just about deleting your data altogether.
Right.
It's also about controlling how it's used and shared.
Making sure it's only used for the purposes you've consented to.
And finally, Appendix 7 addresses the use of cookies.
Those little trackers.
They acknowledge that cookies can be disabled.
Disabled how?
In accordance with browser settings.
So users have some control over cookies.
Providing users with a way to manage their cookie preferences.
So there you have it.
We made it.
We've explored the fascinating nuances of Soho House's region-specific privacy policies.
Uncovering how they've adapted to the diverse data protection laws around the world.
It's been quite a journey.
And hopefully you're feeling a bit more informed
About
how your data is handled.
no matter where you live.
It's a reminder that data privacy is a global issue.
And understanding these policies is crucial for making informed decisions about your online presence.
Stay tuned for part 3,
Where we'll
wrap up this deep dive with some key takeaways and practical tips for navigating the complex world of data privacy. All right, welcome back for the final act of our Soho House.
Well, the final act.
Data deep dive.
I'm intrigued.
We've been through the cookie jar,
Lots of cookies.
explored the privacy notice, and even globe-trotted
Oh, the globe trotting.
through those region-specific appendices.
So much to unpack.
But here's the question
That's that.
that's probably on everyone's mind.
I'm listening.
So what?
So what?
We've seen how much data they collect,
Right.
how they use it, who they share it with,
Yeah.
but what does it all
Because it all.
actually mean for us
Yeah, like what's the takeaway?
as users?
Right. For us regular folks.
That's the crucial question, isn't it?
I think so. It's like we've seen all the detail.
All the ins and outs.
But what's the big picture?
These policies, they reveal a lot
Of what?
about the power dynamics
About dynamic.
between companies and users in the digital age.
It's a bit of a tug of war, isn't it?
Soho House, like many other organizations,
Yeah, they're not alone.
you're gathering a vast amount of data about their members and website visitors.
It's like a giant data collection machine,
And they're quite transparent about it.
which is good. At least they're upfront about it.
Transparency is good,
Yeah,
but is it enough?
that's the question.
Just because they tell us what they're doing
Doesn't mean we understand it
with our data
or that we feel like we can do anything about it.
doesn't necessarily mean we understand the full implications.
Right. It can be hard to grasp all the nuances.
We'll feel empowered to do anything about it.
It can feel a bit overwhelming, like what can we actually do?
You're absolutely right.
Transparency is just the first step, I think.
It's a good starting point.
But it's not the whole story.
Users need to understand their rights
Yeah. Those rights we talked about earlier,
and feel confident enough to exercise them.
it's about taking action, not just reading about it,
That requires more than just,
skimming through long policies.
skimming through lengthy policies.
It can be a bit of a chore, I know. So,
Okay, so
what can we actually do about it?
Yeah, what are some practical steps? What are some takeaways?
For our listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this.
Exactly.
Okay, first and foremost, read the policies.
Read the policies.
I know.
They're long and boring.
And the language can be a bit much sometimes.
Often written in language that feels like it's from another planet.
Legal jargon can be a real turnoff.
But trust me,
Okay, I trust you.
even skimming them
Yeah, just a quick scan.
can give you valuable insights
Done too.
into how a company handles your data.
You can get a sense of their overall approach.
Pay attention to things like
Like what?
the types of data collected,
Right, what are they gathering?
the purposes of processing,
How are they using it?
and your rights as a user.
What can you do about it?
Exactly.
Once you understand your rights,
Uh-huh.
don't be afraid to actually use them.
Yeah, put them into practice.
If you're not comfortable with a certain data practice,
Like if something feels off
exercise your right to object.
or withdraw consent
Take back your permission.
or even request deletion.
Wipe that data off the map.
Companies are legally obligated to respond to these requests.
They have to take you seriously.
It's like taking back some control.
Exactly.
Right. You're not just a passive recipient
You're not just along for the ride.
of data collection.
You have a say in the matter.
You actually have options.
And here's another tip.
Another tip.
Manage your cookie settings.
Oh, those cookies again.
They're everywhere. You can block or delete cookies
Block or delete.
that you're not comfortable with.
especially those third-party cookies
The sneaky ones.
that can track you across different websites.
They're like little spies following you around the internet.
Yeah, but didn't you say earlier that blocking cookies can mess with website functionality?
Yes, that's true.
So it's a trade-off.
It's always a balance.
You might gain some privacy.
But you might also lose some convenience or personalization.
It's about finding what works best for you.
Finding that sweet spot.
No right or wrong answer.
There are different levels of comfort and risk.
Exactly.
And speaking of choices,
Oh yeah, choices.
remember those opt-out tools we talked about?
The opt-out tools, right?
Take advantage of resources like the Google Analytics opt-out browser add-on
Uh-huh.
or the direct opt-out links provided by companies like Facebook and DoubleClick.
Those are good ones.
These tools can help you limit tracking and control how your data is used for advertising.
They're like little shields against the data-gathering giants, right?
Exactly. And if you want to take your privacy game to the next level,
Next level privacy.
you can explore privacy-focused browsers and extensions.
There are browsers specifically for privacy.
There are. They're designed with privacy in mind.
Cool.
They can block trackers, encrypt your browsing data, and give you more control over your digital footprint,
It's like putting on a whole suit of armor.
protecting yourself from all those prying eyes online.
And here's a simple but often overlooked tip.
What's that?
Be mindful of what you share online.
Ah, yes, the golden rule.
Think twice before posting sensitive information on social media or filling out unnecessary forms.
The less you share, the less there is to collect.
It's like that old saying, loose lips sink ships.
But in this case, it's more like loose data compromises privacy.
Exactly.
And finally, stay informed about data privacy laws and regulations.
Stay informed.
These are constantly evolving, and it's important to stay up to date so you understand your rights and can make informed choices.
It's like keeping your finger on the pulse of the data privacy world, right?
Exactly. Data privacy is a complex and ever-changing landscape.
It can be hard to keep up.
But by taking proactive steps and staying informed,
Uh-huh.
we can navigate this digital world with more confidence and control.
It's about empowering ourselves
What?
to make choices that align with our values and priorities.
Right, taking ownership of our data.
Absolutely.
It's about finding the right balance between convenience and privacy.
That balance can be tricky.
It is, and that balance is a personal one.
No one-size-fits-all solution.
There's no right or wrong answer.
But by understanding the issues
And-
and exploring the options available to us.
We can make choices that feel right for us.
So there you have it.
That's a wrap.
Our deep dive into the world of Soho House's data practices.
We've covered a lot of ground,
We've unpacked the policies
explored the regional nuances,
and hopefully given you some practical tools.
to take control of your own online privacy,
Remember, knowledge is power.
especially in the digital age.
And in the digital age, data is power.
It's a valuable commodity.
By understanding how your data is used
It-
and exercising your rights
You can reclaim that power.
and make the online world a little bit more private.
It's all about finding that balance between convenience and control.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the digital world and beyond.